Tonight, a verdict in New York City's Howard Beach trial, an emotionally charged case of alleged racial murder. In profile, the black conservative forced out of the Reagan administration. Also, the desperate search for survivors in one of history's worst disasters at sea. And home for the holidays, the young boy who came back from death.
From the Independent News, this is USA Tonight with Brad Holbrook.
Good evening. Searchers are combing the waters off the Philippine coast again tonight, but so far there is no trace of hundreds of people on board a ferry that sank last night. The boat was jammed with at least 1,500 Christmas travelers when it split in two after colliding with an oil tanker. Only a few survived. Many of the missing were asleep during the accident. Jeremy Thompson has more on one of the worst maritime disasters ever.
Huge oil slicks smeared across the Cebuan Sea, all that remains of what could be one of the world's worst maritime disasters. Since daybreak, rescue ships and planes have scoured the shark-haunted waters of the central Philippines for survivors. Officially, nearly 1,500 passengers and crew are still missing after last night's collision. The ferry Dona Paz, crammed with holiday travelers heading for Manila to spend Christmas with their families, exploded in flames after crashing with a fully laden oil tanker. The ferry sank quickly, though the tanker Victor burned fiercely for 2 more hours before going down. Passing ships seeing the fire in the night sky steamed to the rescue. It's still hoped some survivors may have swum to land on nearby islands. The Don Claudio, the first ship to the scene, picked up the only known survivors so far and ferried them on to Manila. All 26 were being treated at a hospital in the Philippines capital today. Many were suffering from severe burns. The one woman rescued was said to be seriously ill. Survivors described how the Dona Paz had been so packed, many people were sleeping on the deck when they were woken by a huge explosion. One said he thought no more than 150 passengers had managed to jump into the sea. Another said he'd swum for 2 hours, often diving beneath a sea of flames before he was picked up. One man wept as he told his story. Members of his family were still missing. Some survivors claim the ferry was so overcrowded there may have been between 4,000 and 5,000 passengers on board. The Dona Paz has a maximum capacity of 1,600. Outside the hospital, relatives monitored the list of those rescued and waited anxiously for news of further survivors.
No Americans are believed to have been on board. Here in the United States, a helicopter carrying offshore oil workers for a Christmas week shift crashed and burned on the deck of an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. 14 of the 15 people on board the copter were killed. The lone survivor is in critical condition. Bad weather is considered a factor in the accident. High winds and high seas were coupled with low visibility. 16 people dead and no survivors after the crash today of an Air France turboprop near Bordeaux, France. At least one eyewitness says the plane was in flames as it crashed in a wooded area not far from a daycare center where children were playing. No one on the ground was hurt. The aircraft was flying from Brussels, attempting to land at Bordeaux Airport. There's no indication yet as to what caused the crash. When we come back, the verdict in one of the most emotionally charged cases in recent history. New York City's trial of 4 white teenagers accused in the death of a black man. The Howard Beach verdict, next.
USA Tonight, brought to you by Tums and by Sudafed.
In New York City tonight, the climax of several weeks of tension and rising voices as the jury in the so-called Howard Beach racial assault trial delivers its verdicts. 4 white teenagers were accused of chasing a black man onto a highway where he was then struck by a car and killed. The incident in a predominantly white Queens neighborhood sparked an outcry against racism, and the trial has been a focal point for New York black leaders. Tonight, after 12 days of deliberating, the jurors filed back into the packed courtroom to announce their decision. 3 of the 4 defendants guilty of manslaughter, not guilty of murder in the second degree. The 4th defendant acquitted on all charges. At the judge's orders, no audio was allowed recorded as the verdicts were read, only the pictures. There was an immediate angry response in the courtroom from some of the spectators. Chaos breaking out in the hallway outside. For weeks, black leaders have said anything short of murder verdicts would produce outrage in the black community at what appears to them to be racially motivated injustice. In fact, even before the verdicts tonight, thousands of black protesters organized a massive tie-up of subway and highway commuters in New York. Ed Miller has that part of the story.
No peace! No peace! The verdict wasn't even in yet when hundreds of black protesters staged a parade of outrage against racism in New York City. The idea was to throw the evening rush hour into chaos, and they succeeded by delaying hundreds of thousands of commuters. Defying a court order, they started by barricading the Brooklyn Bridge.
No justice! No justice!
The threat behind the protest was to shut down the city. While the blockade at the bridge only lasted a couple of minutes, demonstrators were far more effective down below, where they took over an A train, forcing officials to close one of the busiest subway stations in Brooklyn.
Hell no! We won't move! Hell no! We won't move!
This brother got killed on the highway. Down on the highway, ran down because of what? His color.
That demonstrator sums up the feeling of many New York blacks. For many fear the case known as Howard Beach has racially divided New York City. 1 year ago, prosecutors claimed 22-year-old Michael Griffith was chased to his death onto a highway by 4 white teenagers in Queens. A special prosecutor had to be called in to bring the 4 to trial. It took 12 tension-filled days for the jury to reach a verdict, incredible strain on families and the city itself. Earlier today, the controversy even reached inside the jury room itself when reports surfaced that the jury foreman was willing to sell her story to the highest bidder. A move for a mistrial was denied by the judge before the verdict was finally announced tonight. Okay. New York's outspoken Mayor Ed Koch tried to ease tension by blasting some urban leaders who he claims were pitting blacks and whites against each other.
And so I am outraged with the thought that this city is perceived as not able to protect black lives when there are white lives that are taken too. Add the number of assaults in this town and see who the victims are. Physically assaulted and those who were killed. Add them up. And what we're saying is we're doing the best we can to protect people, whether they are white or black.
The civil disobedience, which began earlier this evening, continues into tonight, with more than 100 arrested in various locations around New York City, not for violence, but for interfering with rush hour transportation.
No justice! No justice!
When the verdict was announced tonight in the courtroom, bystanders shouted, "Murderers!" an immediate display by some black leaders in the community that they were very upset with the verdict.
Right. Ed, let me take you back, if I can, to before the verdict was read, with this massive tie-up of the subway system and the highways in and out of Manhattan to Brooklyn today. What did they expect to accomplish by staging that kind of a massive protest demonstration, and did they get what they wanted?
Yes. First of all, yes, they did. There is a growing feeling among many black leaders in New York City that New York tolerates racism. Doesn't necessarily condone it, but tolerates it, and especially in some neighborhoods. Clearly, the city is not sitting on a powder keg. Most people in New York City live peacefully in integrated neighborhoods. But there are neighborhoods in New York where many black leaders now feel angrily and speak out about it, that racism is tolerated.
And by tying up traffic, it's going to make their point?
It would make their point that they have reached a point now where they won't take it anymore, that they will stand up. And they also wanted to make it very clear that if pushed too far, they can shut down the city. Tonight, 4 subway lines were tied up in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm. Well, this all happening before the verdicts were announced. One would have to imagine that the verdicts as they're announced tonight are not the verdicts that these people holding the protest wanted. Does that indicate further violence, protests?
You can't predict anything like that. Yeah. But there has been a growing pattern of racial hostility in New York City with many celebrated cases. Mm-hmm. There was a grandmother, Eleanor Bumpers, a couple of years ago who was shot by a white policeman. Today is the anniversary of the Bernie Getz shooting where a white man, of course, shot 4 black teenagers. There was the graffiti vandal who some black leaders say was strangled to death by a white policeman. There has been many celebrated cases.
Okay. Thank you, Ed Miller, for stopping by and chatting with us tonight about this particular case. Still ahead on USA Tonight, Alan Keyes in profile of Reagan administration. And next, glorious food at gourmet prices. Super veggies, pesticide-free.
USA Tonight's Health Beat, brought to you by Anison.
On the Health Beat tonight, a taste of the future. Super veggies. The battleground, California, of course. The strategy, win over consumers with pesticide-free produce. Andrea Kaiser reports growers are making major advances because of growing concern over the safety of food.
You are what you eat. If that old saying is true, then all of us fruit and vegetable eaters have reason to be concerned. A study by the National Academy of Sciences concluded pesticide laws fail to protect the public from cancer-causing residues. Meanwhile, another federal agency, the General Accounting Office, discovered that government tests only about 1% of the nation's fresh food for hazardous levels of pesticide residue.
The only way you know what's in your food is to have it laboratory tested. And at the
nutritionist Dara Lee Scanlon works for Irvine Ranch Supermarkets, an exclusive grocery store chain in the Los Angeles area. Irvine has hired a private company called NutriClean to test its produce.
Produce can vary so dramatically from field to field. We want to be able to back up the claims that we're making that we have the highest quality produce and clean produce.
At Irvine Ranch, customers can buy super carrots. They are certified to be grown pesticide-free and contain 747% of the USDA recommended dose of vitamin A, partly because of better growing techniques. The kiwi is also pesticide-free and has 93% of the recommended dose of vitamin C. Apples, persimmons, lettuce, and grapes are also super clean and packed full of nutrients. Nutritionist Scanlon says there is a direct correlation between flavor and content.
We've all tasted the tasteless tomato that looks great when we cut into it. It has absolutely no taste at all. That tomato will also be low in terms of vitamin A and vitamin C content.
The testing for Irvine Ranch Markets and another large chain of supermarkets in California is going on in these laboratories. Here, NutriClean grinds samples to a pulp, treating them with a solvent to extract the residues. Then the mixture is put through a gas chromatograph where the results are analyzed. NutriClean owner Dr. Stan Rhodes says we are no longer living in a Garden of Eden, so all food contains some level of pesticides. But he is trying to reduce the exposure to pesticides by encouraging farmers to stop growing with them. Each week, 15 to 20 growers join the NutriClean program. But some farmers complain that the pesticide debate has been blown out of proportion. The Western Growers Association says most pesticide residues break down naturally before the fruit is eaten. Nevertheless, consumers we talk to preferred knowing their fruits and vegetables are pesticide-free.
I really prefer to eat as healthily as I can. I don't like feeding my children, my family, pesticides, things like that. I prefer to go the fresh way. If I could grow them myself, I would, but I can't.
Eating cleaner fruit and vegetables is not costing Californians any more than they're already paying at these fine grocery stores. That's because the markets are already charging more. But the markets say they're absorbing the $20,000 a month cost of certifying. Irvine says the program is paying off. Sales of its produce have gone up 20%. In Los Angeles, this is Andrea Kaiser reporting.
Well, it's going to be a Christmas to remember for an 11-year-old North Dakota boy. Just 2 weeks ago, Alvaro Garza was considered clinically dead. His body temperature had dropped to 77 degrees after falling through thin ice into frigid water. When he was rescued after 45 minutes in the water, he had no signs of life. Today, hundreds cheered as Alvaro gave a short thank you speech to hospital workers who helped save him.
Okay. Sure,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I would like to thank everybody who prayed for me and helped me. I can't wait to get home and back to school. Merry Christmas, everybody.
As a result of the accident, Alvaro is wearing ankle braces and wrist splints and has limited control of some other muscles. Doctors say it is still uncertain whether the boy suffered brain damage.
USA Tonight's Health Feed was brought to you by Anison.
House and Senate budget negotiators may be at it all night. They're trying to break a deadlock that is holding up passage of a massive federal spending bill. The hitch seems to be the so-called fairness doctrine. That legislation would reinstate an FCC policy requiring broadcasters to air all sides of controversial issues. President Reagan says including that would prompt a veto. Aid to the Contras is another issue yet to be resolved. Without an agreement soon, the government will be out of money again. At least 19 Palestinian protesters are dead tonight after 14 days of violence in Israeli-occupied territories. Today's killings occurred as Arabs throughout Israel united in a general strike. We have two reports on the ongoing violence and U.S. efforts to cool tensions, beginning with Louise Bates.
On a day when the Israeli government said it was behaving with calm and restraint in dealing with the unrest, 3 more Palestinians were shot dead by the security forces. when trouble broke out in Gaza, a helicopter dropped tear gas bombs on gangs of stone-throwing demonstrators. Israel has accused the media of exaggerating the scope of the unrest and has brushed aside widespread criticism of its action from around the world. The general strike was supported by most of Israel's Arab workers, and those who fell into the hands of the soldiers found little sympathy for their cause. In Nazareth, striking workers held a peaceful protest, dancing and singing songs of support for the Palestinians. But before long, trouble flared as soldiers used tear gas when demonstrators blocked main roads and threw stones at cars and pedestrians. Troops chased away rioters, but the tear gas still lingered as the soldiers regrouped, and at least one of them discovered that the gas doesn't differentiate between friend and foe.
PLO leader Yasser Arafat is promising that the protests will continue until Palestinians achieve their goal of possessing their own homeland. In Nicaragua tonight, the talk is peace, but the action in the field is bloody. Government soldiers are holding off an invasion by Contra rebels into Nicaragua's gold and silver mining region. It's the largest attack in the 6-year civil war. Meantime, peace talks between Sandinista and Contra leaders are underway in the Dominican Republic. A 2-day Christmas truce is due to begin in Nicaragua this Thursday. A changing of the guard in outer space is in the works for the Soviet Union. 3 Soviet cosmonauts blasting off from Central Asia today, heading for a Wednesday rendezvous with the Mir space station. 2 of the new arrivals will replace space record holder Yuri Romanenko and his partner, who have been on the Mir for months now. The 3rd cosmonaut will bring the Romanenko team back to Earth somewhere around January 1st. The crew rotation is seen as a major step toward a permanently manned orbital space station. For Yuri Romanenko, it means an end to the world's longest space trip. As of today, he's logged 319 days.
Today in music history, brought to you by Hall's Mentholyptus. Hall's Mentholyptus cough tablets with vapor action for penetrating relief. On this night in 1969, Diana Ross and the Supremes performed Someday We'll Be Together on The Ed Sullivan Show. It was the last of 20 appearances they made with Ed, and their final ever for a TV audience.
We'll be together. Oh yeah, oh yeah.
USA Tonight, brought to you by American Express and by Taster's Choice.
Alan Keyes, he's a black man who has resigned the Reagan administration in protest. In Profile tonight, Barry Cunningham talks to the man some think could break a racial barrier by becoming the first black Secretary of State.
Now, this would have been one of the recitals that I did in India.
Singing classical songs in German is just one of the unexpected talents that has made Alan Keyes a leading spokesman of the conservative movement in America. He appeared with Republican presidential candidate Jack Kemp today to push for closing down the New York office of the PLO.
I think that there are folks in the State Department who are reluctant to characterize the PLO as a terrorist organization.
The former U.S. diplomat is free to criticize the State Department since he resigned in protest last September.
I was in the Reagan administration for 6 years. During those 6 years, it was as if I did not exist, despite the fact that I was, in the last 2 years, the highest-ranking black official in the State Department.
The 37-year-old Assistant Secretary of State quit because he felt his boss, Deputy Secretary John Whitehead, was talking down to him. Here at the State Department, Ambassador Whitehead refuses to discuss the episode except to deny vehemently that he is guilty of any form of racism. And in fairness, Alan Keyes has not used the word racism to describe what happened.
A lot of people saw the way Alan was treated and said that's racism. But it was not Alan who said it was racism. Alan understood that he was being treated rudely.
It was former UN Ambassador Jeane Kirkpatrick who discovered Alan Keyes in 1983. He had been a lowly Foreign Service officer before then, stamping visas at the U.S. consulate in Bombay, India. One of those visas to America belonged to a lovely Indian woman named Jocelyn, who became Mrs. Alan Keyes. Today they live in suburban Virginia with a 2-year-old daughter, Maya.
What is this?
What's this?
Wow.
Oh, what's right?
His resignation from the Reagan administration hasn't changed Alan Keyes' political philosophy, especially his defense of the administration's constructive engagement policy towards South Africa.
Traditional liberal establishment view of South Africa is basically bankrupt.
Keyes opposes anti-apartheid sanctions in favor of building black economic power in South Africa. And he defends Reagan's cutbacks on social welfare, programs Keyes says enslave blacks by addictive dependency.
Freedom doesn't mean when you get what you want from an all-powerful government. Because I think you can kill people with compassion. You can kill their spirits. I think there are a lot of people in this country who would like us to look at government as the good master. The one who is going to feed you and clothe you and house you well. And all you have to give up in exchange for these goodies is your freedom.
Before he left the White House, Alan Keyes was often accused by other blacks of being an Uncle Tom on the Reagan plantation. Since he quit, he seems to be less the Uncle Tom and more the doubting Thomas of Reaganism.
I myself have to sit back sometimes and ask myself whether the old sort of traditional Wall Street big business establishment of the Conservative Party, of the Republican Party, cares about people.
In Washington, this is Barry Cunningham.
And finally tonight, the story of a company that can't seem to get into the holiday spirit, and as a result is sparking a Christmas revolt. 100 employees at the Okanite Cable Company in New Jersey were suspended today for wearing Santa Claus caps. They donned the caps in support of fellow workers suspended last week for wearing Santa hats. But the company is not amused. Tonight, Okanite says it will fire any other workers who wear the hats. As one union official puts it, the plant manager is a bit of a Scrooge. And that is USA Tonight. I'm Brad Holbrook. Thanks very much for being with us. Hope to see you back here tomorrow night.